When you say the word cocktail, I mean, two things come to mind kind of immediately. It's like, oh, it's a drink, but it's also an occasion, a gathering. It's something that you do. It's a social event, it's a cocktail.
It's very interesting that Christian Dior, the fashion designer, said cocktails perhaps are most representative of the American culture. It's this idea of putting pieces together and allowing a consumer to see how they interact.
People are getting more creative with drinks, and that's fun. They're taking even twists on the old classic cocktails.
When I grew up in the mid-50s and the early 60s, I remember my parents would have parties and there would be the cocktail hour, actually a time associated with the cocktail that happened away from the table before dinner and was totally about communication, about talking.
Our first real definition is about 1806, where an editor in the Northeast said that a cocktail is defined as this idea of a distilled spirit plus water plus sugar plus a bitter. 4 simple elements. So when you think of the Sazerac or a Manhattan or some of the classic cocktails, that is the picture that we get. We suddenly move into the 50s and 60s, and I think your picture is Mad Men, and cocktails are still king. They're just great, they're properly made, they're beautiful glassware. Then, after this, leads us to the 70s. It's rock and roll, it's drug culture, and you began to see the emergence of the wine industry at this point. Fascinating time for the world and America, but you begin to see the decline of cocktails.
So I think to see that curve again, it sort of goes into a lull, and then everyone says, let's go back to the beginning. That's the Renaissance, back to the beginning, back to the rebirth, and do it right again. I think at this point now, that's what we're seeing happening.
Gin at its essence is a distilled spirit with neutral grain spirit. Juniper has to be added, but then you can add any plant you like. And so that's how we ended up in gin. Started out with this idea of 2 targets. One, craft cocktail movement is really growing. So could you give them a great, balanced, approachable gin that mixed well with whatever they wanted to mix it with, but wasn't still so juniper forward, so citrus forward, or so earthy botanical forward?
So I always liked gin, and then later as I got into cooking, I soon realized that all of the botanicals that are in a gin are all the same ones we use in the kitchen. We were already using juniper and coriander and various ones, citrus peels and so forth. And so all of a sudden there was this great overlap with the kitchen and the idea of distilling a spirit. And so I had played around with it. And then the main thing was I could really see the sense of personality in a gin. So I was aiming for a gin that was very perfumey. I like things that are light and clean and polished and vibrant. So ROXOR was never meant to be sort of a heavy gin or an oily gin or too earthy a gin. It was meant to have this vibrant, clean sort of sense to it.
So think of these elements that you would never think of in gin. Cocoa nibs, so a little chocolate, cinnamon, pecans, sarsaparilla even, the root beer flavor. The movement, just as is in food, which is to more natural ingredients, in our case, using the plants, using the herbs to make the best possible spirit we can make, even though we're making it in an older style still, a 50-gallon still, we're able to watch that step by step and day by day to know that we're delivering a really unique product.
Yeah, I think from the beginning it was to have a very signature, unique product that was part of a category but was incomparable to anything else. So the bottle design, the flavor, everything stood as its own personality that you could say, oh, that's the ROXOR style.
On the rocks, R-O-X, shaken, or, O-R, stirred. And so this idea of this very flexible beverage and a word that complements that and literally tells you what it is.
But it's not one that you have 2 or 3 sips and fall asleep. You know, you feel like you want to talk to somebody. You feel enlivened. You know, I think that's important.
Our bottle should represent that style and that feeling of a luxurious quality experience. And so that's the idea. So you're seeing faceted windows. And just think of the windows of life, both letting light in and letting things out. The difference in ROXOR Gin, it's refreshing, it's approachable, it's not heavy on your palate. And for those, I think we hear the terms, the ROXOR One More. So this idea that, wow, this is a cocktail I'd like to have another of.
The one person that says that I love this gin and I don't like gin, I think that's encapsulates the whole thing.
That's the approach. Start with a target. The target is bartenders. The start is a very broader, approachable consumer base, even people who don't like gin today. And that allowed us to, what I think is create a unique space for us and a brand that can stand on its own as a fabulous gin, which is at 90 proof, perhaps as smooth as any gin you've ever tasted.